Recently, the child in me got the greatest news of its wildest dreams. When I saw the Age of Empires 4 announcement trailer, I was stunned. It was an emotional moment for me, the yearning of nostalgia for a wasted youth in front of a CRT monitor. But within that churning ball of emotion, there were the scars of disappointment. Age of Empires is an incredibly important game series for me and many people. It was my first exposure to online play. It was the first game I really played on PC. I mean, I played Command & Conquer, but Jesus Christ, I played Age of Empires. I think I was about 8 or 9 years old, and I would wake up early before school to play it. So much of my formative knowledge and experience in games was built playing Age of Empires. To see that there was another one coming was an incredible feeling, but after I watched the trailer, I was left with a feeling of dread, because I dreaded what I was going to find out, because I knew it was too good to be true. And the more I find out about the game, the more that dread grows and pounds the initial excitement into marmalade. This is me explaining, trying to make a case for why I feel justified in not only not being excited for Age of Empires 4, but positively dreading that it's coming out, dreading that it's even in development. But it's also me hoping that I'm wrong, that someone can convince me otherwise, that this game isn't going to be the biggest disappointment in the franchise. The big reason I feel justified in this crushing feeling of dread is that Relic are developing Age of Empires 4. Now, if you go back 10 years and you ask me what I think of Relic, I'd give you a very different answer than I'd give today. I'd say they're awesome and they make great games. Homeworld, Impossible Creatures, Warhammer 40k Dawn of War, Company of Heroes, basically listing some of the most innovative and interesting real-time strategy games from the 2000s. Homeworld and Homeworld 2 are probably considered the best narratively driven real-time strategy games ever made. Impossible Creatures is the most unique real-time strategy games in terms of its mechanics for how you create your units that I've ever seen, if you exclude Metal Fatigue. Warhammer 40k Dawn of War was phenomenal. It introduced an entire generation to the setting with its crisp and brutal execution of a traditional real-time strategy game in the Warhammer 40k universe. Company of Heroes took what was a sub-genre of RTS in its infancy and defined it for years to come. The game was so good that it became the yardstick to measure against. When you look at this pedigree, it seems almost hilarious that I would suggest that Relic are going to make a balls of Age of Empire 4. But oh dear viewer, I've only listed their success, and with great heights come great lows, and far the mighty have fallen since the glory days. If you ask me, Relic hasn't made a good game for a decade. Now I can already hear the masses crying out, but I liked Dawn of War 2, I liked Company of Heroes 2, I liked Dawn of War 3. And it's perfectly fair and reasonable to enjoy those games, don't get me wrong. But I didn't like those games. They were just Company of Heroes but worse. Nothing you ever say will change my mind about that. Dawn of War 2 wasn't so much a spit in the face of the core audience for Dawn of War as it was Relic squatting on top of their fanbase and squirting out a fetid turd on their hopes and dreams. And rather than apologizing and cleaning up after themselves for their aberrant behavior, instead Relic hunkered down further, grunting and straining to release the ultra turd finisher move that is Dawn of War 3, as if to put the final poop smeared nail in the shit-stained coffin that they buried themselves in. If Dawn of War 3 was the coup de grace, then Company of Heroes 2 was the rear-end blowback that signaled the ass-pocalypse. The game has sat around mixed and mostly positive reviews for some time on Steam, being met with much less critical acclaim and fanfare than the first iteration of the series. Not content with simply messing up the quality of their games, Relic has decided that they want to go one step further with the business model. Relentless and endless DLC and microtransactions fill the Steam store for Company of Heroes 2, where you can no longer just buy a game and play it, you have to get a fucking spreadsheet out and figure out what you're willing to pay for which piece of content. That's more of a criticism of the wider games industry, which I'll leave to my mate Jim. That's a bit more of his ballgame. Now I will throw Relic a bone here. I wasn't being entirely honest when I said they haven't made a good game since 2006. They did make Warhammer 40k Space Marine, which is an unbelievably good hack and slash game that features the raw meatiness and power of a Space Marine chopping orcs to bits. If anything, the fact that this game is good reinforces my point here, because ultimately my point isn't that Relic can't make good games, it's that Relic is no longer capable of making good real-time strategy games. And that's just a brief overview of Relic. I haven't even started talking about Microsoft in this picture. Talk about a place where hopes and dreams go to die. A company so out of touch with its audience that it relies on a quasi-monopoly status to remain relevant. Now there is a glimmer of hope for Microsoft. It seems that someone there gives a shit because we got Age of Empires 2 HD released on Steam with workshop support, and even new updates and content. Oh my god, Microsoft are doing it, man. They're bringing it back. They're listening to the audience. Just kidding. The second someone got a sniff that there was some money to be made from milking this old beloved franchise, they broke out that industrial milking machine and cranked that bitch to 11. Because the disappointment train here began with the announcement of the first Age of Empires HD remake, being Windows 10 and Windows Store exclusive. Now, I personally have no problems with the Windows 10 exclusive part. I actually think that's less egregious because from Microsoft's perspective, they don't want to be supporting old platforms. They've learned from XP and how expensive and difficult it was to shed that monkey off their back. So they've made big steps in avoiding a repeat, and that's reasonable. I don't think it's fair to nail them to the wall on that point too much when you consider the history. I won't blame you if you hate them for it, but I can at least empathize with them for the reasons they're doing it. However, where shit gets downright dirty is the Windows Store exclusivity. Nearly 5 million people have bought Age of Empires 2 HD on Steam. Why are you reefing these people out of their existing harmonious ecosystem? It is so infuriating that I can't have all my games in one place because some fuckboy in Microsoft decided that making an extra whatever percent was worth degrading the user experience and forcing the Windows Store upon us. First of all, the Windows Store is a travesty filled with mobile game microtransaction laden trash, and the few times I've attempted to navigate the Windows Store, the only way I was able to reach where they're selling PC games was by typing Windows Store PC games into Google. I literally couldn't get to the PC section of their Windows Store even though I'm browsing that fucking shit show from a PC, and it should just default to the PC version of the store and not shove these game-loft atrocities in my face. Oh, and the PC store that I actually found brings me to the PC box section. You know, where you order boxed games to be shipped to your house like some kind of savage from the 90s. I still haven't been able to find out where I can get digital games for PC on the Windows Store. It's the same shit where you used to be able to just get Netflix and be happy, but now every Tom, Dick and Harry are pulling their own ecosystem and content platform out of their arse. I'm a little bit emotional about this, and I'm speaking in hyperbole, and maybe I'm being more harsh than they probably deserve. This is just the introduction of the video in case you were wondering, so let's actually list off my predictions for how they're probably going to make a hames of Age of Empires 4. The first reason is that it's going to be 3D. Try and name a traditional RTS game with 3D graphics that's actually good. It's very hard to do, and there's very few of them, whereas I can easily rattle off a list of top tier 2D RTS games from the 90s. Dawn of War 1 was good. Not exactly traditional in my opinion, it took some liberties with the squad system. Grey Goo was okay, Ashes of Creation was okay, Empire Earth is one of the most recent examples of a good 3D traditional RTS that I can think of, and it was from 2001, and it wasn't even that good. Warcraft 3 is probably the best example, but even it took some liberties with heroes and items. Now I can hear some people screaming Command & Conquer Generals was awesome, and they're wrong in my opinion, because that game killed the franchise for me, and has only continued to slide downhill in a crushing and excruciating slide to shittery and irrelevance. StarCraft 2 was disappointing, but okay. Rise of Nations and Rise of Legends, they were actually pretty damn solid games. Age of Mythology was decent, but I never liked it nearly as much as the other games, and I feel like it rode on the success of the previous games. The best example of a traditional 3D RTS game is 8-Bit Armies in my opinion, which was made by Petroglyph Games, who did Grey Goo and Star Wars Empire at War. Also, Frank Klepacki from Command & Conquer did the soundtrack for 8-Bit Armies. Can you tell I love that game a little bit too much? You should get it, it's great. Okay, so what is it that makes 3D so bad for traditional RTS games? There's a few things, and the first and foremost is visual clarity. When you use 2D models and sprites with a fixed perspective camera, everything has defined shapes and silhouettes. Typically a unit can turn maybe 8, maybe 16 at most directions, and will have animations for each of these directions. This means you only ever need to learn a small number of images and animations per unit in order to recognize them and process them when looking at a battlefield. In a 3D game, you instantly lose that. Units now have to be considered from 360 degrees, which vastly increases the amount of processing that goes into reading what's going on in the gameplay. This isn't all that 3D brings. Usually it comes burdened with extremely flashy and gameplay obfuscating special effects like fire, smoke, dirt, shadows, lighting, washed out colors, and so on. All these things serve to do is to make it less clear what's happening and make things less readable, and I would argue less interesting to look at. Let me see the fight. I don't want to see the smoke. I want to see units beating each other into oblivion. The best RTS game to ever avoid these pitfalls in my opinion is 8-Bit Armies. With its very distinct style, vibrant color palette, and extremely faithful adherence to the traditional RTS gameplay, it's the closest thing I've ever seen to a good 3D traditional RTS, and yet it still suffers from being 3D. While the unit silhouettes are quite distinct, the moving perspective of the camera makes it hard to tell who's who sometimes, and rocket infantry can blend into the regular infantry. It's not as bad as most 3D traditional RTS games, but it's still there. I've put this argument that 3D ruins traditional base building RTS games forward before, and all I've ever received in response are are insults, being called a 2D hipster, a technological dinosaur, or even a Philistine, which was a bit weird, but I've never heard anyone come up with anything resembling a counterpoint to my complaint about the visual clarity, so I hope someone can do it now. My second prediction about how they're going to mess up Age of Empires 4 is that there's going to be microtransactions. Now, no matter what you think of microtransactions, I feel that I can state with integrity that no matter what the implementation is, they always hurt the gameplay experience, always, no exceptions, no excuses, and no alternatives. Microsoft have proven that they're not gun-shy about shoehorning microtransactions into games, and Relic are no strangers to it themselves, so I feel very safe and justified in saying that there's a probability that we will see microtransactions in Age of Empires 4. Now, why do I believe that microtransactions always hurt a game no matter the implementation? Well, part of it is experience. I've seen it happen, and I've played too many games and have too many war stories of great games ruined by the relentless greed and need for microtransactions to fuel quarterly milestones. Once you let that microtransaction foot in the door, you can bet those fuckers are going to try and crowbar that door open and unleash the floodgates of nickel and dime fuckery. You know it's out of hand when the few games that don't go in for this wallet buggery are worth talking about, and wallet buggery is the norm. This includes cosmetic only microtransactions. Even though they're less egregious than others, they still have to waft their desire for income in front of you as you're just trying to enjoy yourself. The only game I've played where it didn't affect the experience is Overwatch, which doesn't shove it in your face and gives you a steady supply of tasty new treats from the loot boxes without obviously asking you to buy more. Actually, I just thought about loot crates and equipment in an Age of Empires game and gagged a little bit, and then I remembered they've already done that. My third prediction is that the game will be unbalanced. Relic seems to operate under the philosophy that a playable game is a balanced one. I feel that anyone who plays their games would be willing to back me up on that point. Their games aren't horrifically unbalanced, but they never really hit the mark from what I've seen. There are a lot of people who could make the case that Relic can't balance games better than me, so I won't try too hard to make that point because I feel like it would be an injustice to give you a half-formed story. I will say this though, the last person that I talked to who still plays Company of Heroes 2 said that Relic basically gave up balancing the game and handed over the balancing to a community mod team. I'll let you draw your own conclusions from that, but like I said, based on that alone, it sounds like they have trouble balancing a game. My fourth prediction about how they're going to get Age of Empires 4 wrong is that they're going to get the unit collision wrong. More and more, as time passes, I've been playing real-time strategy games with extremely crisp and smooth unit movement with almost no bumping. Day9 has an incredible video where he talks about unit collision in StarCraft Brood War and the depth and mechanical complexity that brought to the game. And what I'm saying here is pretty heavily informed and influenced by that video and my aforementioned experience in playing real-time strategy games. It seems really logical that you would want to have smooth unit movement, consistent unit collision rules, and for units to have intelligent pathfinding, but it's actually counterintuitively a bad thing. If my units don't need me to babysit them a little bit, then all you're doing is de-emphasizing the micromanagement of the game and emphasizing the macro management without giving the player the choice of which they want to focus on. Some players might carefully micromanage their workers to be as efficient as possible, spreading them out nicely to reduce bumping and clumping. Other players might carefully micromanage their units in battle, making sure that their units are positioned carefully and are responding actively to developments on the battle while letting their economy and production be as slightly inefficient. Other players could be even so good that they can do both without any issues, but if you take away unit bumping, for example, then you reduce the depth of your game and you make mastery less achievable and less interesting for the player. The more work a traditional real-time strategy game does for you in managing your empire, the less rewarding the gameplay is, in my opinion. I'm not saying things should be clunky and difficult for clunky and difficult sake, but just let things be a little bit clunky. Let units occasionally bump into each other. Let them sometimes get lost trying to get to their destination. Make me work a little bit to get the outcome that I want. Make micromanagement important as well as macro management. Managing my units shouldn't just be a box select and attack move or assigning them to a resource node. My fifth prediction about Age of Empires 4 is that esports and the problem of franchise are going to come to the forefront. It's no secret at this point that esports are a huge force in gaming, but developers like Relic seem to keep forgetting that it's just a subgenre of gaming and it can't really be forced. I hope they have learned their lesson from the aforementioned coup de grace that Dawn of War 3 was, so clearly borrowing mechanics from popular esports and simplifying the gameplay in some ham-fisted attempt to attain an esport-like ecosystem. We've seen all this sort of stuff before, with the endless flow of World of Warcraft clones in its wake. Somehow no one ever sat down and asked the question, maybe the theme park MMO genre is oversaturated. Maybe that market need is already filled. Maybe we should innovate. Maybe we should stop dropping hundreds of millions of dollars on these games that are trying to tap into an oversaturated market, and maybe we should go back to our roots and appeal to our core audience. It's really telling that this sort of thing is becoming more and more common from a wide variety of game developers, and it's telling us that they don't know how to make good games anymore. They only know how to copy superficial things and chase the money. This is in spite of the fact that people are pretty crystal clear in what they want. Make the thing that you made before with a few changes for the better. That's it. That's all you need to do. You don't need to get rid of base building. You don't need to add heroes. You don't need to add esports mechanics. You just need to capture the feel and tactile nature of the gameplay. You need to visually excite the player in the same ways as the predecessor, and the point here is that Relic has proved themselves incapable of this with Dawn of War 2 and 3. Stop trying to copy saturated markets. Examine your base and give them what they want, and we want Age of Empires 2 with a new skin and some cool stuff thrown in. That's all you need to do. Don't fuck it up. My sixth prediction is that the Windows 10 exclusivity and the Windows Store exclusivity go hand in hand. Microsoft are going to try and use the new Age of Empires games as a carrot to entice you into their ecosystem. The problem is, as I talked about earlier, from my experience, their ecosystem is shite. Let me get my games on Steam, where I've already started my Age of Empires collection, as have nearly 5 million other people. I get it, Microsoft, you saw those 5 million sales and nearly exploded in excitement, but a lot of those sales came because the game was on Steam. Your store sucks, it's unfocused, it's unusable, stop forcing me to use it. I don't like it. I'm not even mad about the Windows 10 exclusivity. I can kind of see why you would do that, but the Windows Store, that's a line I'm not ready to let you cross. I'm genuinely considering just not getting these games simply because I don't want to deal with another proprietary platform, especially one so unfocused and unusable as the Windows Store. If it was like Steam and it focused on PC games and stuck to PC games, I'd have less of an issue. Although I have some complaints about Steam, at least they're making an effort to fix those issues. When I say I'm considering not getting these games, it's partly because I can't actually find where I'm supposed to click on that atrocity that is Windows Store to even buy the Age of Empires 1 remake. I've looked, and again, the only way I found it was by Googling. I literally was unable to get the game through the store. I had to look it up on the internet. I want to make sure I'm clear here. I don't hate Microsoft or Relic. I've just been disappointed by them so much that I'm jaded by everything that they do. So there you have it. My 6 predictions for why Age of Empires 4 is going to shit the bed, and the resulting disaster will be why we never get an Age of Empires 5. If I'm wrong on any of these, I'll be happy to be wrong. I want to be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. The little kid in me wants me to be wrong. Something tells me I'm right though, and that's really depressing. All we can do is wait and see, but I have zero confidence that Relic or Microsoft will deliver on this. The sad part is I never even talked about the calamity that was Age of Empires 3, but this video is already long enough and depressing enough. Hope is the very first step on the road to disappointment. I love you all very much, and I'll see you next time.